Hello, Erin Crawford. How are you doing today?
Hello, Ben. I'm stoked. I just made a tweet this morning. I said, every day in Bitcoin is a good day.
Yep, yep,
Even if you're having a shitty day, it's always a good day with Bitcoin. So,
indeed,
yeah,
indeed.
but extra stoked today for sure.
I'm so happy to have you on here because when I was accumulating a bunch of Bitcoin content and things, the Why Bitcoin Only page is like my baby. I went deep into every single podcast I could find, and yours was like the gemmiest of hidden gems. And I'm going to put in the show notes the first three episodes that you did, just talking about money and Bitcoin and life and why it's important. I just think it's such a great introduction. And you have such an interesting life and niche in here. Your tag or your handle rather on Instagram and Twitter is Death in Bitcoin. And I feel like when people see that, they're like, "What the hell?"
Yeah, they're like, what?
Like Bitcoiners are weird enough. Like, why is death in her name? What's that about? So I want to
Yeah,
hear your whole origin story of
okay.
the biggest inflection points of your life that brought you to that name and what it means.
Okay, so you said you wanted at least three 15-minute rants. So maybe
Minimum.
this will be like one 45-minute rant.
It still counts as only
Yeah.
one though. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'll preface everything by saying I'm 43 years old. So, um, putting my life story into a nutshell gets more and more difficult the older you get, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I can barely remember my 20s and my 30s. It's just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
I have a general feeling of how that time period was, but the memories get foggy as time goes by. So, but I'll go back to the death and Bitcoin thing. So during the summer of 2020, so during the first year of the pandemic, I became a death doula. The following year, I discovered Bitcoin. And so I was working on both. I was primarily studying Bitcoin and just, you know, I discovered Twitter and all of these things that I had never accessed before.
Can you
And
explain what death doula is? I didn't even know what that was when you
yeah,
first mentioned it.
sure. Just remind me of where I was maybe in case I get a little lost. But
Sure thing.
so a lot of people have heard of a birth doula. A lot of women, even if you give birth in a hospital, it doesn't have to be a home birth. A lot of women have birth doulas. So essentially, a doula is an advocate for their client. So birth doulas help their clients create a birth plan. They meet before the arrival of the baby to review the plan, make changes, talk about what's going on, yada, yada, yada. So a death doula is essentially the same thing. You're just on the opposite end of the life spectrum, right? So I would say like a birth doula helps people in and a death doula helps people out. And because of this overarching fear of death that envelops our society, a lot of people do not plan for their death. So this is kind of making a bit of a resurgence. And I think actually the pandemic was quite helpful. Every day you turn on the TV and you see these death numbers on the bottom of the screen. And, we had never really done that before as a global collective, right? To see these numbers happen. I'm not saying they were any higher than they normally are, but anyway, I think it brought a lot of people face to face with like, oh shit, even if I stay inside, wear a mask, get vaccinated, like I could die. And it's like, well, the truth of that is you can die at any point in time for any reason that you can't even begin to comprehend. So I have never actually worked with people one-on-one as a death doula because it was during the pandemic and, it was very difficult to get into people's homes. So what I did was I created an online program that essentially walks people through the steps of things you would need to, or you may want to consider when it comes to your end of life. Some very practical things, like, do I want to be cremated? What kind of funeral do I want to have? And then a lot more esoteric stuff, like what kind of emotional baggage do I need to look at and release before I die so that death comes in a more peaceful way.
Closure, the
Yeah,
ultimate closure.
exactly. Because I kind of have a belief. And I mean, the interesting thing about being a death doula is that nobody dies and then comes back and tells you how to do it properly, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to a birth doula where, okay, you give birth, you're probably still going to be alive afterwards, and you can share that experience with people. Oh, this is what worked for me, but I think my 10 years as a yoga teacher and going through, meditation and the mind and the emotional body, the spiritual body, all of that kind of stuff. I think that death is a purification process, and whatever you haven't dealt with, over the course of your life, it's going to come up and it's going to come out at your time of death. That's my theory anyway. So I really think that death work can be done by anybody at any stage of life, really. And, I encourage everybody to contemplate your death on a daily basis. If I die today, is today a good day to die? I think is old Native American saying. But yeah, what am I going to do today that if I die, I will be, fulfilled, or I'll be happy?
Why are people so scared to talk about that topic? Like, it seems like it's impossible to talk
Yeah,
about death and not feel like you're bringing the vibe down in the room.
I know.
It just seems like
I know. It's so funny because every time I bring it up, like I work in a restaurant, right? And there's not a lot of people that work in restaurants that are having these kinds of, deeper thoughts, at least not in my restaurant. So every time I bring up death, people say, oh, you're so negative, and like, there's nothing I'm just realistic. I'm honest. There's nothing negative about talking about death. It's a fact of life, right?
mm-hmm.
But, in a practical sense, what happened is we always used to die at home in, the 1800s, the early 1900s, like essentially before World War II or World War I, sorry. We used to die at home. That's actually what coffee tables were made for, was to lay a dead body.
What?
In the middle of the room so that people could come in. Yeah, it's wild, right? At least that's, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's what I learned. And particularly in Canada, universal healthcare became a thing in the 50s and 60s. And this is kind of where it all ties into Bitcoin too. Universal healthcare came in. People started moving from small towns and countries into the city. So your community, right? Like these 50 or 100 people, we used to live in these small communities. We're moving to cities, and all of a sudden, all we have is the nuclear family. All we have is, husband, wife, 2 kids. So the responsibility of caring for someone who was dying, it was too much. Both parents are working full time. So, hey, here we have this universal healthcare. Well, let's just send grandpa to the hospital and he can die over there. The exact same thing happened with childbirth, right? We never used to give birth in hospitals.
Yeah. It's absorbed both ends. The bookends have just been absorbed into this big mass of government taking care of your family, which has a lot of second order effects, I can imagine. So like, what sort of like a second order effects has that done to people and communities and families and just like how people live their lives?
So what it did, both with childbirth and with death, is it took both of those experiences, which are arguably the 2 most transformative experiences that a human being can go through. It took both of those things and put it behind closed doors, right? Put it into the hospital, like literally out of sight, out of mind. So it's kind of become this thing that's shrouded in mystery. And humans tend to be fearful of things that they don't understand or that they're not familiar with, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that has just, over the decades has perpetuated into this greater fear which again, I think was capitalized on during the pandemic. I think that's why so many people were just very quick to follow these, government guidelines for safety, right? Because everyone is
You don't
so
get to see your
afraid to
dying
die.
family member. You're not.
Oh,
We won't let you in there because of our. Oh, look at it says the rule right there on the paper. Like you can't hug your grandma.
yeah. I just think that is I think that is an actual crime against humanity, what they did. Not allowing people to be with their dying relatives. Like I almost can't even talk about it. Like I find it so repulsive and disgusting. And the fact that the people that, worked in those hospitals actually abided by those rules, it just, yeah, like it makes me rub my head because so um so to circle back to how I ended up with the death and Bitcoin thing, which is the name of my podcast, my Twitter handle, all of that kind of stuff. So I sort of had these two lives going on at the same time. I was a death doula, and I was, doing these weekly calls with older women and women mostly. I don't think I ever had a man show up, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And then I was doing Bitcoin at the same time. And I thought, ooh, I better keep these two things separate. Death and Bitcoin really have nothing to do with one another. And then the more the more time I spent in the death space and learning about Bitcoin, I just saw so many parallels between the two things. And the three that I talk about are empowerment, enlightenment, and evolution. And I think that death and Bitcoin are both of those things. Like there's not a lot of things that I can point to and say I know 100% that is what is true. I feel like in this age of everyone's talking about misinformation, disinformation, who's got the truth, who doesn't. I don't know. I just that all that stuff is just, to me, it's just noise. Like I can't even, because who knows the truth? Nobody really does. We don't even know why we're on this planet or how we got here. You know what I mean? And you can have a belief in something, but to actually know the truth about something, what did people say? Like there's only 3 guarantees in life: death, taxes, and something else. I forget. But taxes don't actually need to be true, right? The only reason taxes are true is because of our government, and government sure doesn't need to be true either. But we can see, yeah, death is truth because no one has achieved immortality yet. Mm-hmm. And I might have a more difficult time dissecting why Bitcoin is truth. I don't even know if I could really speak intelligently to that. That would be something I'd have to spend a little bit more time chewing on. But I think because it's open source, because it's math, you need to kind of understand computer stuff, which I don't. And you need to understand math, which I do at a basic level. But it's verifiable. I think that's the big thing. Like no one is saying, ooh, you should trust Bitcoin because I think X, Y, Z. You can actually go and investigate it for yourself and see like, oh yeah, this actually does make sense.
It's the removal of needing to trust anything. And neither you or I is technical enough to dive deep into the code base of checking to make sure every 10 minutes there's a block.
Yeah.
And ironically, I trust the smart people who are technical enough to just tell me it works. And
me too.
I understand people. I don't understand code that well. I understand people. Yeah. I trust I'm able to find really smart, sharp people. And when I was in Austin, Texas, going to these BitDevs meetings and listening to all the developers just put their heads together, it's just like, these people are on another level. They're doing some shit right here. Like this is not a joke.
I know. I went to a BitDevs meeting in Denver in the fall, and I I think I understood maybe 5% of what they were talking about. So when people bring stuff up to me like, oh, Bitcoin's not scalable, what about this? What about that? I'm like, you know what? There's people out there who are on another level of intelligence that you and I and the majority of people just do not understand. I'm like, and I know they're working on it. I just trust them. I just know they're working on it, right? Because they have a vested interest in the thing that they're working on. Yeah.
So one of the notes here I took, if we could go back real quick to your conversation about death, is that we kind of glazed over how you pretty much only worked with women and men were just not involved. So why are women more attuned to these very powerful life moments? Like, we all know that women are the one physically giving birth of the human into the world, so they are very intimately involved in that. But they are also more involved in the other side, I would say. And I can see this in my own family. My mom has been very, very involved in like each of my grandparents' deaths as well. And not that my dad isn't, but there's a different energy there of like intimacy and connection to that experience. So what do you think that is? Is that just something that's part of our DNA inside each gender?
I think so. I think it's part of our nature. I also think, perhaps you could tell me as a man, but I think it's our nature, and also I think it's an expectation that society places on us. Like, men just aren't really expected to be emotional or involved in emotional stuff. And practically speaking, a lot of men are very like mission oriented. They're out there doing what they need to do for work to provide, or whatever the case may be. I mean, some men are just drinking Coors Light and watching Netflix all day. There's also those people. So, yeah, I think it's a woman's, more so like a woman's intuition kind of thing, like that nurturing. And I'm not a mother. So, that part of my femininity, I've actually had a lot of difficulty tapping into, because I'm not a mother, right? So I had this kind of unmet need, I suppose, to nurture people in that way. And I think that's one of the reasons that brought me towards the work of being a death doula, and also the yoga. Like I said, it kind of felt like a natural transition after spending so much time in the yoga space. You learn about Buddhism and reincarnation, and that death isn't such a big hairy deal. We all go through it. So given that fact, how am I going to do it in the best, and I say that air quotes, like in the best possible way? And it's just like, 95% of people that go to yoga are women too. I think it's changed a lot over the last 5 years, but a lot of men go to yoga because they want to, loosen up their hamstrings. They don't.
I think they want to go because there's a lot of girls there.
Yeah, that too.
The only reason I went to yoga in college is because the girl I was into pulled me into it. And I was like,
Yeah.
sure, I'll go. And I actually ended
Yeah.
up loving it. And I mean, everyone ends up loving these activities, but they're just like kind of defined as this, like, this place where girls go and men
Yeah.
go and get sweaty in the gym and lift heavy weights. It's kind
Yeah.
of the two stereotypical like exercise routes.
Yeah. And it's, it's really interesting. And the masculine feminine conversation is,
Oh, we're gonna get into this.
yeah,
It's
it's
time.
really funny. It's like, it's one that I don't really like to have, but I also do like to have it. I used to think, oh, more men need to talk about their feelings, more men need to go to therapy, that's why they're all so angry, yada, yada, yada. And now that I'm on Bitcoin Twitter, I'm like, Maybe I'm actually wrong about that. Maybe that's, I'm hyperimposing or like projecting my feminine needs onto men. Maybe what men actually need is to like have a purpose, right? And have a motivation or take action on something. Like I look at the men, I work in a male dominated industry. I don't think those guys need to sit around and talk about their feelings. I think they need to go and lift some heavy shit at the gym, and have a purpose in life. So, maybe that's kind of where that divide comes in as well, in the whole like feeling your emotions and taking care of other people in those vulnerable times, right? Maybe men really aren't wired for that stuff, and maybe that's okay.
And this is always just a complicated conversation of trying to figure out what should each gender be doing to
Yeah.
become their best selves, because everyone knows that our bodies are completely different, we're wired differently, and I think the world around us is really pushing both sides in to try to just turn us into this gray goo of
Mm-hmm.
human, like.
What makes
And
you think that, Ben?
oh, I don't know.
What would
It's,
make you possibly say that?
and this is, I mean, so let's look at both sides here, because I'm also curious how you see this. But when I look at the mainstream media and the books and the movies and the Netflix shows and pretty much everywhere you look, the books that are made for women are all about like boss bitch lifestyle, like be more independent, you don't need no man, and grind, like be yourself and you
You
don't
can
need
have it
anyone else.
all.
Yeah,
How to
yeah.
have it all. Yeah.
And on the male side, we're told that, I mean, toxic masculinity is everywhere, and being masculine is a toxic thing. And like you're talking about, people need to be more emotional, more open about the emotions, and exercise is right wing. It's bad. Don't work out. Drink this soy slop and chemical juice instead. Don't drink like don't eat or drink nutritious things. Meat is bad.
Yeah.
Just eat leaves and chemical milk. And when I talk about these things on social media, because I intentionally made like a specific highlight for like things centered to men and things toward women, so I can kind of just throw things out there and see see what people think.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because the same people are agreeing or disagreeing with both of them. It's not like the girls really agree with, more femininity and they're against masculinity. It's like you're either both or zero. The same people are thinking like we need more polarity. We should focus more on women following more feminine path and men following a more masculine path. And there's the other people that are like, no, I like feminism is that like people will go by feminism and they'll say toxic masculinity. So it's either they want people to go more into the middle or more outside. And is that how you would view it as well?
Now, yeah. If
Hmm.
you and I would have had this conversation 5 years ago, I would have had a completely different
Oh, me
response,
too. Yeah.
Like I was raised by a single mom who worked full time, went back to college when she was 40, um, entered into a male dominated field, never talked about her emotions. It was like, so I saw that and I was like, oh, well, that's what I'm going to do. So I spent, my 20s and 30s focused on going to school and trying to figure out a career. And I never really felt the urge to have children. So, and now, and it's really bizarre how this happens, but, and I think I messaged you about this one day, like now that and this is going to sound crazy to people that don't understand Bitcoin, but it's like now that I'm in this Bitcoin world and I view what's going on through this lens, it's like I can see how that narrative has been given to us, men and women, but I'll speak to women because I am one, that, you know, you don't want to be beholden to your husband and your children. It's way better to be beholden to your boss and sit in a cubicle all day. You know, it's the two things aren't mutually exclusive, right? I feel like you can be empowered, you can be sovereign, you can be, you know, an independent woman, but you can do that inside of a traditional feminine role, right? And I think maybe that's where Bitcoin does come in, because Bitcoin does encourage you to be an empowered, sovereign individual. Yeah,
I would say real quick, even outside of Bitcoin, just when people are given more breathing room to figure out what they naturally want to do and which direction they want to go with their life and how they live it, is what's the most important. And the reason why we keep bringing up Bitcoin is because for us, that's given us more, not even financially, but just like mentally. Like, I
yeah.
haven't gotten rich from Bitcoin, but it's giving me a stable savings vehicle that I know can't be taken away. And that's
Mm-hmm.
all you really need to get a lot more freedom of thought, freedom of being, figure out what's really the best thing for me. And the way that I view people now going into their 20s, graduating college and entering the world. So I'm 28, so I have just in the last few years um, really seen the effects of my classmates going off into the workforce and how it affects people.
Mm-hmm.
And something I have noticed very clearly is that the men that I know are doing pretty well. They're chilling. You know, some of them are a little unsure about what they're doing with their future because, you know, it's difficult out there right now, of course, for everybody. But the women are having a rough time.
Mm.
They're really having a hard fucking time because they are in this hustle, hard work, 40, 50, 60 plus hour weeks just to be able to afford to eat. And I mean, and you would be a better speaker on this than me, but just the way that our bodies are designed, like, women are just on a different wavelength and cycle. Like, women are on a 30-day cycle approximately, and men are on like a daily reset button. Like, we pretty much just we reset every morning and we can just go, go, go. And biologically, that will just make us sort of fit into different places a little bit better. But when we bring that up, it immediately gets into a touchy conversation because women will say, "Oh, you say like we're not good enough for that, or like you're better than us." No, it's just our bodies are different, right? Like, is that a bad thing to talk about? What is your view on that whole conversation?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. You know, I look at the women that I'm around, and a lot of them, and I feel like it's getting worse and worse, like a lot of them have anxiety disorders, depression, or, you know, they're in therapy, they're reading books, and they're, you know, my one friend has like 3 jobs and she can't meet a partner because she has no time, but she also lives in a $1,900 a month apartment, right? So she has to work all of those jobs. And um, yeah, I don't think that women are designed to hustle and be in that frame of mind. I think, you know, we can obviously work, we can obviously make money and do things that we're passionate about, but I think being in a man's world, again, air quotes, is I think it has been really detrimental over the long run. And then you get into this vicious cycle of, well, if I'm not able to do that, if I'm not able to have a full-time career, if I'm not able to meet a man, if I'm not able to do all of those things, something must be wrong with me. And a big aha moment I had a few years ago was, maybe there actually is nothing wrong with me. maybe it's this external environment that I'm attempting to integrate into or exist in. It's like putting a plant in a toxic waste dump and expecting that it's going to flourish. Like, you would never expect that, right? And yet that is kind of what we're doing right now as human beings, and perhaps with women more so in particular. We're expecting us to flourish, but we're doing so many things that are outside of our nature and our, thousands of years old genetic programming that takes a really long time to catch up with what's going on. Like, I feel like our DNA is like, what are you guys doing? Like, how do we cope with this? And then all of that manifests into anxiety, depression, and then, like I said, it is this vicious cycle, because the more anxious and depressed you get, the more anxious and depressed you get. And then, round and round you go.
And here comes
So,
big pharma from the
exactly.
ropes. We get more pill
Exactly.
sales. I'll
Exactly.
put this in the show notes somewhere. I can't remember where I grabbed it from, but if you look at the antidepressant usage among several different groups, I think it was male minority, white male, female minority, white female, and three of the four are basically gradually increasing over time, and white women is going straight the fuck up. It's
Mm-hmm.
like going exponential.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that friend that I was talking about, the one that works 3 jobs with the $1,900 a month rent. And, you know, I said to her, I said, have you ever just thought that maybe it's not you?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe all of these problems that you think you have, or all of the ways in which you are flawed, or that you're not doing enough, or whatever, maybe it's actually not you. And to me, when I had that realization, that was such a relief. Like, I could just finally relax into who I am. Not saying that, I'm not going to have awareness of my behaviors, and I'm not going to think about, how am I, you know, not that I'm just going to be like, oh, it's not my problem, it's yours, but it just allows me to just relax with myself a little bit more, and maybe not read a self-help book, and maybe look at society instead and go, what can I do out there to change not just the environment that I'm living in, but that the whole, my community and the whole planet is living in, really.
Yeah. And I feel like we've talked about this a little bit generally, but I would love to hear your exact transition moment where you were in a dark place, you have figured things out, and you came out the other side. And I told you before we started recording, I pulled a screenshot of one of your messages
Mm-hmm.
you sent me. I think it was a few months ago, when I was just, ranting about this. I think I posted a meme, and this is like the classic feminism meme, is it's a picture of a girl in like a field with cows and a bunch of children, and says, "This is oppressive.
Yeah.
This is empowering. Girl in a cubicle."
Yeah.
Which is essentially like the modern feminism in a nutshell, of like girls should be working, and we worked so hard for this. We finally are working in an office. Yay. And
Woo.
like this is great. And some people, and a lot of younger, and this is another interesting thing, is how generationally
Mm.
different people's opinions are. And one of the most interesting patterns I've seen is that, just talking women specifically, pretty much everyone under 30, they re hard. They see these things and they think like, no, we're doing great. Like feminism is good. The fact that we are getting more into the workforce, we're getting more into traditionally masculine roles. We're getting more women leaders, more women CEOs, more, just across the board there. And then between, I would say, 35 to 50, like older millennials to all of Gen X, it's complete opposite. The women in my life have been like, no, you're getting scammed. This is not for you. I've been through this shit and I learned. And people like you, and my roommate when I lived in Austin, Texas, was a 48-year-old woman, and she was very, very into this, and she loved what I was doing, and she was my biggest cheerleader. Like, yes, yes, we need more guys talking about this. That this isn't what's good for women. And then after that Goldilocks zone, you get into the boomers, and they're just in the Democrats versus Republicans puppet show. Like they're 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 pretty much completely lost in that, and so they're just going to fall in line with whatever the TV is telling them, either just repeating what Fox or MSNBC is saying. And for the majority that I've been around, being from the West Coast, it's like feminism is great. It's good. It's great for women. So what do you think about that thesis? This is something I just thought a lot about. There seems to be this Goldilocks zone of Gen X. And are you Gen X? Are you at the very bottom end of Gen X? Or
I'm
very
1980.
tail
I'm 19.
end
Yeah,
of
I'm
millennial?
1980. I'm kind of like I don't feel like a millennial. I identify more as a Gen Xer, but it's like
You
apparently
seem
I've
you're
heard
like
there's
a Gen X that just was born a couple of
yeah
years wrong.
I've heard there's like this 5-year window between 1978 and 1983 where we actually don't fit into either. So
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever.
Why do you think this is? Why are there two bookends of people that are so pro feminism and a middle section that says no, this is bad? And are these people in the middle, are they crazy, or did they just hit the perfect sweet spot of not being propagandized by the media like the boomers have, and not being born into this system and just thinking and that's all they know on the younger end because they haven't had the experience to get through it? Because that's what I think is that Gen X zone, which I would consider you in, your a sweet spot that has the experience, but you also have sort of watched the boomers devolve into just being sort of zombified by the mainstream media. What do you think of that? Do you think I'm onto something here?
I think I'm having so many thoughts and I'm kind of working through this in real time as well. So thanks for asking the question. I think, as with a lot of things that are happening in the world today, I think perhaps, and I think this is the way the pandemic started as well. I had this conversation the other day. I feel that perhaps this all started with good intentions, right? Do we want women in the home to be completely dependent on their husbands, to have no financial sovereignty, to have no outlet for creative expression or community? Do we want them to be,
A
smacked
slave,
if
like a
dinner is
slave to the
bad?
husband. Yeah,
Exactly. So, no, of course we don't want that. We want women to be able to walk through the world with the same sense of autonomy and empowerment that men walk through the world. Maybe not in the same way, but do I want to feel as safe walking down the street as you do? Sure. So I
definitely.
think perhaps, do women want to be able to vote? Maybe that's where this all kind of started. And yes, of course women should be allowed to vote. But then I think, as with a lot of things, I feel like humanity is just like we're constantly correcting. Like we correct and we overcorrect, right?
Right.
So I like over the decades, over the years, I think it's just gone to this extreme place where I feel like we're in with pretty much every aspect of society right now. The gender issues, all of it. I mean, we're kind of at this like major, I hope we're at the peak. Please God, let this be the
Fingers
peak.
crossed.
So, and like the pandemic, I do think at the beginning, the government was suggesting things that would keep people safe. But then at some point, somebody saw an area of opportunity where this whole situation could be taken advantage of. And I feel that perhaps that is what has happened with feminism also. How can we
Mm-hmm.
get 50% of the population, half of the people on the planet. How can we get those people working and paying taxes?
Exactly.
Wow, what an amazing untapped resource. We could have double the amount of tax money. Imagine the number of wars we could start if we start. So,
and how much easier will it be to funnel kids into our government schools
yes,
and be able to absorb all these new young people coming into the world and be able to fill them with what we want them to think and not learn from their mother and their father and their family. The government finally gets to feed them from birth.
Exactly. So I have a hard time being like, okay, are these people nefarious? Are they evil? Do they know? Did they have this plan right from the beginning? And sometimes I think the answer to that is yes. And then sometimes I think they can't possibly be smart enough to have, seen that far into the future and go, oh, if we give the people this narrative now, in 100 years, we're going to have a new slave state happening. But on a lot of levels, that's exactly what is happening. People are living in cities. They're not getting married. They're not having children. They're eating the bugs. They're sleeping in the pods, like all of the things that you said, right? And
dating apps are the new normal for relationships. It's like just going on Tinder and just swiping on hot faces.
Yeah.
And that's the new social scene for both sides.
For both sides.
But I would argue that's even worse for women. Would you agree?
I think so. Yeah. I used to be on dating apps. And again, I had a light bulb moment one night where I was like, what am I feeling when I decide it's time to pick up my phone and go on this app? And I realized it's when I'm bored and when I'm lonely. Those were the two. That was why I would pick up. And then I'm going, do I want to meet a man who is also bored and who is also lonely? And these are the conditions that we come together.
I can vouch. They're doing the exact same thing for the same reason.
Yeah, exactly. We all
men don't go on there like, oh, I'm gonna be some powerful man and save a woman. No, we're lonely and we're bored too. And it's the same thing. You're just going to meet the same type of person.
Exactly. But, to circle back to the whole thing, it's just like everything else. Whether it was well-intentioned or whether it was a bad intention from the get-go. I mean, I think women voting is a good thing. Does that mean the entire feminism movement should not have happened? Would I give up my right to vote if all of this bullshit that's currently happening would go away? No. I wouldn't. I want to be able to vote. I think that's a human right. But it's been spun, like everything else that gets spun in the media, that if you don't work, if you don't have all of these things, that you're not living a fulfilled and purposeful life, and I think that narrative is changing for some people, but it all takes time. And I think, like you were saying earlier, I think it takes people like me to go, okay, now that I'm in my 40s and now that, my biological window for having children is closing, if not already closed, I can look back and go, shit, I probably would have made some different choices. Had I known, at the time, I thought I was making the best choice. I thought I was doing the right thing by going to school and having a career. And it's not really about right or wrong again, and again, further to your point, I don't really even know if it would matter, to a woman in her 20s, if I were like, hey, don't miss your opportunity to have babies because you don't want to be 40 like me and regret it one day. We all kind of have to go through our shit in order to be like, oh, shoot, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I should have gone about it differently. But I think the perspective is interesting. And I think at the very least, younger women would be interested in hearing about that, even if they think I'm like some crazy, spinster lady. I don't know.
And I got distracted earlier, but I think you summed this up really well. That message you sent me, I forgot to actually read it. So I was going on some rant about, how I think that modern feminism is the worst thing for women, and I got a bunch of, people in their 20s just saying like, "Oh, this is bad. Stop telling girls what to do." And you said, this is what you said. You said,
Mm.
the feminism movement was an orchestrated psyop to break up the family unit and further degrade the fabric of society. I was indoctrinated into it and spent my 20s and 30s working 50 to 60 hours a week, drinking, and finding my sense of self-worth in the work that I did. Now I'm 43, single and childless. I am pissed off that we bought into this narrative of feminism as empowering, when in reality it's a complete sacrifice of our femininity. No wonder the world is so fucked. Thank God for Bitcoin for opening my eyes to the reality of what is going on. I hope I can use my life experience as an example going forward so that younger women don't miss out on the things that I have for the sake of quote unquote equality.
Damn, that was good.
You got some good shit sometimes.
You
Sometimes
should read
you're
more. You
cooking.
should read more of my shit out loud.
I
Like,
could
wow,
go
I
back
said
in the
that.
DMs. We've
Okay.
had we've had a few interesting combos on the back end. I'm sure we could. But
And listening to all of that, I also want to say that I am incredibly happy and fulfilled. It's not like I'm walking around going, "Oh my god, I missed my chance," and I'm self-loathing and all of that. Like, I also feel like I'm in a very unique position because of the choices I've made and just the way that life has, played out for me. And, of course, like, my childhood trauma and all of that stuff plays into exactly, why I'm sitting here today having a conversation with you. Um, but, that being true, also, yeah, it is a total psyop. It is. So, I'm comfortable with both things, right? Do I wish I was in my 20s discovering Bitcoin and seeing through behind the veil and, looking at things for what they are? I'm not going to lie, yeah, it'd be sweet, to be able to turn my life around in my 20s and my 30s. But my life is still changed completely because of Bitcoin, and maybe I've missed out on that biological part of my life, but I feel like I've also been given a lot in exchange. So now I'm kind of at the point like, okay, what am I going to do with all of that? Right? How am I going to take the circumstances that I'm in and how am I going to help to change the world? Even if it's just for one person or two people, maybe it'll be for a billion people. I don't know. But I think, as I get older, there's just duality in everything, you know? You have to be able to hold multiple truths at the same time and accept where you are in life and then figure out, yeah, what am I going to do with this unique situation that I'm in?
well, I think I can speak for everyone listening and all the people that follow you on the social media that we appreciate you so much for just being such an open book on these like very personal things. It's
Yeah.
awesome and it's so valuable to so many people out there. Like specifically young women, and I've told you before that you are the person I send all of my female friends to because like let's be honest, girls just get tired of hearing guys just rant about Bitcoin and life and like femininity. Like what the fuck do I know about femininity?
Yeah.
Having people out there who have been through this really change their mind and change their view from life experience is extremely valuable. And I'm finding that one of the topics I keep coming back to in the last few episodes I've done of this is how optimistic I am about social media becoming a much more real place where people are really talking about these very deep topics openly. And that is what we need for the younger generation to see. because if we don't do that and come out and talk about our experiences and what we've learned from our lives, then they're just going to be fed garbage by the powerful fiat world interests. And I think this could be a great transition to just the world of fiat in general. And
Mm.
as I went on a walk last night around my beautiful little hometown here, and I went back and listened to those first 3 episodes of your podcast that I mentioned earlier, are just like my favorite intro to understanding money and why everyone should be learning about money, and the idea of fiat and Bitcoin, how it's so important in our lives. This bee is just flying all over me. If you see me just waving my arms around like a crazy person, it's this bee. So Robert Breedlove, shout out to him, he has said before that, and I agree, drilling the word fiat into the public consciousness has been one of, if not the most powerful sentiment shifts that us Bitcoiners have really spearheaded, of getting people to think about what that is. So I use that word whenever I can. I stuff it everywhere in Instagram, and sometimes people just don't know what is this word. Like, it's just such a strange word. So why don't you explain what is fiat and why is it so integral to all the other things we're talking about in our conversation? Like, literally from the money to the masculine, feminine, to the media arms and the educational system, the medical system. How does this all play together? What's fiat to you?
Fiat is garbage. Like bullshit garbage. I have a really funny, like little tiny story. So I orange pilled my mom. My mom is 70.
Amazing.
She's coming to El Salvador with me in November for her 70th birthday.
Let's go.
It's going to be off the hook. Anyway, she really loves going on cruises. And I'm like, Mom, I cannot get on a cruise ship. There's just something inside of me that just repulses me from going on a cruise. And her text
A cruise is
back to
pretty
me,
fiat.
her text
Yeah.
back to me was, yeah, that's way too fiat for you. And
Yes.
then she started ragging on my brother. I have a brother that's 2 years older than me, and he's so fiat. But my mom was like, oh, I bet you Jason just thinks that fiat is a kind of car. Ha 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 ha, and was laughing. It was really, because there's those cars that are called Fiats, right? Those little, 2-seater things.
And shout out to Safedine for making the word fiat an adjective. I think he is
Yes.
the one that really started pushing that, and I love it. I just
Yeah.
But what actually is it? So the word, like the definition of the word and where it came from. What's the origin?
Definition. Well, the fiat means, by decree, because
Mm-hmm.
I say so, essentially. So fiat is because somebody more powerful than you, again, I put that word in air quotes, because somebody more powerful than you says that that's the way that it is. So yeah, feminism in its current form is fiat, because it's just what the story that we've been sold about what that thing is. Whereas I think true feminism is like, yeah, connecting to your feminine nature, being in the flow, being that nurturing, emotional support person. It's not living in a city and working 60 hours a week. So, I think a lot of women who get triggered, and I hate that word, but a lot of women that get triggered by this idea of what feminism actually is, like, they don't even know what being feminine is. And I include myself in that statement. Like I said, I was raised by a single mom who worked full time. Like, I never had an example of, I don't want to say real feminism or true feminism, maybe like feminism by nature. I never had that example. So I think even the idea of what feminism is has been co-opted and, co-opted. But coming back to fiat, yeah, it's like, I don't know, everything that is just bullshit is fiat. Which I know doesn't really explain it all that well, but like cruise ships are fiat. Like, you're not traveling, you're not experiencing a different culture by going on a cruise ship. You're just taking your life as it is at home and putting it on a boat and sticking it on some water, right? Like, you're not on the streets of India, volunteering for a hospice, you know?
I
Yeah.
still think we're talking about it more in its advanced slang version, though. Where did
Okay.
it
How do you
actually?
define it?
So I would. I mean, so the way that that's a good question. You've really turned the tables on me here. Now it's my
Yeah,
turn.
there you go.
I start with the money because
Mm,
fiat money is where all of this began, and 1971 is. And I hate explaining this because I just listened to you explain last night. You're going to do it way better than me, so I'm going to
mm.
have you give your version after this. But in 1971, well, before 19, well, let's say for 5,000 previous years, let's really like look at the big picture here.
Yeah.
People use gold as money because it fits these main characteristics of what money should do. It's scarce. You can't print more of it, so it follows the rules of math. It can't be inflated or stolen by the government, just, creating more of it and diluting the supply of everyone else's. It had these basic rules that made things stable. And it made it so you could have a bar of gold and you could buy it or you could get it when you're a kid. And then when you're old, you can pass it on to your grandkids and it's worth more than when you got it. You can buy
Or
more
at
with it. You
least
have
the
more
same.
purchasing power. At least
Yeah.
the same, but
Or at
usually
least the
more.
same amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was a good money. Not perfect, as we can talk about, but it was good because you could save it and savings was rewarded. Like people who are savers and thought long term and did not spend their money like crazy when they didn't need to, they were rewarded for that because they got more purchasing power later. And fast forward to just, about 50 years ago, 1971, um, I'm glazing over a lot of details here, but in super general terms, the world just said, we're going to stop using any connection with gold. Like there was a long period there where it was gold and paper because the paper was hard to move around, or I'm sorry, the gold was hard to move around. So the banks put paper on top of it, which is easier to move. And the dollar bill was a claim check for the gold. And it said that on the bill that this is redeemable for gold. This is just like a trading token, but the gold is the real money because it follows those rules we talked about. And then
Mm-hmm.
1971, Richard Nixon comes up and says, yeah, we're just going to forget
We're not
about
going
the
to do that
gold.
anymore.
We're that shiny yellow rock, we're just don't worry about it anymore. We got you. We're just going to make the paper the money itself.
Mm-hmm.
And just like that, the government has complete power to create money for themselves whenever they want for any reason. And the consequences of this have been crazy. And we call that paper monopoly money fiat money or fiat currency.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically when all tether to mathematical reality was cut. And a very small handful of people at the very, very top 0.001% suddenly have the power to do whatever they want, whenever they want, and it causes all kinds of cascading effects through every single industry in the world where all of a sudden it's more rewarding to just suck up to the money printer at the top. They get more money and power that way than actually serving customers in a good way and earning people's business by doing good work. And that permeates across everything. And
Yep.
that's where we are today. We are 50 plus
Yeah.
years into this experiment of just
It's
everything
not
being
going, I
crazy.
don't think it's
So
going that well. Do you? I don't think it's going very well.
I don't think it's going well either.
It's probably time to try
And
something
but
else.
but here's a question though: is people will say, oh, like people were so barbaric and crazy and things were bad, like women couldn't vote, women were in a bad place many hundreds of years ago. So some things are a little bit better, and I would say like yeah, I mean there's some things that have improved. Like we're not sacrificing ourselves at the altar, ripping each other's hearts out every day like normally. Like, some of
Mm-hmm.
these things humans have gotten better at, but when you look at the modern age, just to imagine if we had good money at this time, how many things would be much better and how much improved it would be. And here's an interesting little nugget here. One of the reasons why I actually came back home here to Washington for the last couple of weeks is my high school reunion. And we pulled out these little time capsules with a piece of paper where we answered some questions on it. And one of the questions that we all had scribbled in was, what's an invention you hope to see in the next, 10 years? And, people put all kinds of stuff, I don't remember, but it kind of got the conversation going. I think I brought this up to one of my friends, and we were thinking, so we graduated in 2013, it's now 2023. What has there been any really crazy invention, like any great new creation in the last 10 years? Because all I can think of is the TVs are a little thinner, the phones are a little faster. Uh, we went from 3G to 4G to 5G.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, what the innovation has just plateaued. And you could even extend that, I would argue, back to, beyond just the last 10 years. Like, think about the last 20 years, the last 30 years, even. I mean, we haven't had anything that was really discovered that totally changed the course of humanity. What
Yeah.
do you think about that? Like, would
That's
you
because,
agree?
yeah, I would agree because we're all on the hamster wheel working for the
Mm-hmm.
man. Like the 1800s when we were on a gold standard, that was like the greatest period of human flourishing. That's when the automobile was invented. That's when air travel, I think the printing press was before that, but it was still under a gold standard. These major innovations in technology all happen on a sound, well, not all, but a lot of them have happened on a sound money standard. So yeah, a lot of advancements, like you said, like, there's faster iPhones and all of these things, but there hasn't been a real, I'd say Bitcoin and AI, right, which is the last decade, give or take. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really know the ins and outs of all of it, but um yeah, and I think that's something that, if we get back onto a hard money standard, when we get back onto a hard money standard with Bitcoin, I think that's where we're going to see, again, these leaps and bounds in innovation, because we're going to have time to sit around and think about this stuff and create this stuff and, do it together. Right now, the majority of the population is just head down working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and then numbing out
Doing
with
pretty useless shit
drugs and
for the most
alcohol.
part.
Yeah, doing
Yeah.
pretty
Not
useless
doing anything
shit. Yeah.
fulfilling. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, even the people I know that are in like the best jobs they're just like pushing papers, working for a boss, and they they
Yeah.
they aren't gaining fulfillment or real they aren't really progressing through like any sort of spiritual journey or personal growth journey. If they have any time, they do that outside of work.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Because I think, people are in survival mode. Most
mhm.
people are in survival mode and they just don't have the bandwidth for even entertaining a new idea like Bitcoin. But, everyone's going to the grocery store and going, holy shit, what's happening here? And again, it's this vicious cycle, right? Because that just makes you work harder or more or longer, whatever the case may be. And you're working for money that the government prints for free. And that should really piss everybody off.
Yep.
It pisses me off, but it doesn't piss me off as much as it would if I didn't have Bitcoin, right? Like I feel like I've got most of myself out of the matrix. I'm just kind of infiltrating the fiat world from the inside by doing that. But yeah, explaining inflation to people that it's literal time theft. I
And
think,
this ties into your death doula work, and that's a
yeah,
big topic you talk about, is that is a major tie-in, is that you have a very intimate understanding of life being a finite amount of energy that we have to be on this earth. So when we look at fiat currency, which is this money, and maybe we can like dig into inflation a little bit more, how that actually works, but in a nutshell, every time the government prints money to do anything, it lowers the value of everyone's money. Everyone that holds the currency, even in other countries, like other countries that use US dollars, those people are, losing, the things get more expensive at the store. And it's not things.
Other countries especially.
Yeah.
Things in
Yeah.
Canada. When I got back from the States to Canada, I was floored at how expensive things are here. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And things are not getting more expensive because a McDouble cheeseburger is more valuable than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's because your money is losing value and you need more of it to be able to buy things.
Yeah.
And every part of the supply chain is getting more expensive for all these businesses providing goods and services. So they have no choice but to raise their prices to be able to continue running a business. And it all comes back to the government diluting the money supply with a money printer.
Yeah.
Where was I going with this? Yes, connecting it with the
death.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like that's where I feel like people that don't understand Bitcoin, people that don't understand money, people that don't understand WTF is going on. I think when you present inflation to them in that way, that it is literal time theft. The average person has to work an extra, I don't know what it is, like 5 hours a month or 5 hours a week or something, just now to maintain the same standard of living that they had 2 years ago. I don't know if those numbers are accurate, but I'm just
we know it's
it out
more.
As
it's
an
just
idea.
More. Yeah.
Yeah. So what effect does that have, right? It takes you out of the home. So it affects your intimate relationships. It affects your relationships with your children. It affects your relationship with yourself. Maybe that yoga class you used to go to once a week, now you can't go to anymore because you're at work, or you can't afford it because you need to buy groceries instead of pay for that yoga. So this is where the insidious nature of fiat money comes in, and with the government having access to the money printer and just printing whatever they want, whenever they want.
With no responsibility needed, because if they do a bad job, doesn't matter. They can print more. They are not incentivized to do well with that printing. Yeah.
I think that's why Bitcoiners have this saying, fix the money, fix the world. Money is the store of our time. The literal time of our life we exchange in order to obtain money as a medium of exchange so that we can buy the goods and services that we need in order to survive, right? So through inflation, through making things more expensive, the government, you either need to work harder or work more or whatever, and that money is being taken from you without your input, without any say so. So the government is literally stealing the time of your life. And then, especially in Canada, every day we get another rebate for something. Like we get grocery rebates, dental rebates. Like the government is trying to say, ooh, look at us. We're making your life more affordable for Canadians. And it's like, motherfucker, you're the one causing the problem. You know what I mean? It's like, let's wake up. Let's stop. I just find it so incredibly offensive. It insults my intelligence that we're being fed such bullshit. It's just such total, utter bullshit. And I think if more people can just understand that, like, how can you not see the injustice that fiat money has caused? And like you said, then you turn your kids over to the state because you have no choice. Both parents have to work in order to maintain a standard of living. So what do you do with your kids? You send them to a government school, government daycare, whatever the case may be. Even if you send them to a babysitter, you're still outsourcing the responsibility of raising your children to someone else, right? Like, you're really at the mercy of other people to take care of and potentially like program your child. So it's really, I don't know, man. Like, every time I see the price of gas go up, I'm just like, well, you know, there's another family that's going to be destroyed. There's another kid that's maybe going to transition in 5 years or whatever. You know, it's like you can just really see how it all affects everything. And for whatever reason, a lot of people just have a really difficult time being open to receiving that information. But I feel like that is changing also. I feel like there's definitely, you know, in the last couple of years, there's more people that have heard of Bitcoin. There's more people that are curious about Bitcoin. And I'm coming up to like less resistance about it. People used to be very resistant to it. I don't know if you have that same experience.
Yeah, man, a lot of great points there to pull on. I mean, just the rebate thing is, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's even worse in Canada than the US, I would say, but we have it too. I mean, I remember uh the stimulus checks, or there's everyone's rattling about the stimulus checks. We get, like, $500 or $1,000 or whatever thrown into our bank account, and everyone's like, "Yay, we're getting free money! That's awesome!"
Do you know what we got in Canada?
What?
We got $2,000 every 2 weeks.
Wow. So
Canada,
even more.
Canada quadrupled its money supply in 2 years.
And
It's
I
mental.
feel like, to the layperson, someone in America will hear that and be like, "Man, I should move to
Oh, you're
Canada.
so
I get
lucky."
way more money from the government." But the thing, people just aren't able to think through that first layer of immediate benefits and
Yeah.
understand what's really going on is they're just printing more money, and it's going to create more inflation, and
You're
everything's
going
going
to
to get
pay
more
for it.
expensive. You end
Yeah.
up in a worse place.
Mm-hmm.
And they're definitely not just printing that money for the people. They usually just give that as a few scraps to keep people from rioting. They print 90, I don't know the percentage, way more to their lobbyists and their corporate donors and the big dogs to just continue enriching themselves. And they
Yep.
throw a few scraps for the sheep to just not revolt, essentially.
Yep.
So whenever you hear, and I think we've all heard the term "there's no free lunch" before. I feel like that's massaged in all sorts of ways by different people trying to push a different agenda. But I think this is the most important to understand in terms of "there's no free lunch" is when the government is trying to give you free stuff, it's just going to be end up worse for you later. It's a short-term solution. It's going to make things worse down the road. Stimulus checks, rebates, pretty much any government program where they're printing money to just throwing money at some thing that they want to try to improve, they're just hiring contractors. Like, here's an interesting one for you before I bring up that other point, was this idea of who will build the roads. That's like the go-to thing about the
Yeah.
people who think it's just too extreme, that we're too mean to the government.
Yeah.
They do these great things. We have, like, police, and we have firefighters that keep us safe, and they build the roads so we can go to work. And how do you respond to that?
Well, I think people that look at the government in that way are just completely disempowered people. And like, I've said this for years now, that I really believe on a hard money standard like Bitcoin, if things need to get done, we will do them. Like, the people will take care of the road. Like, we'll figure that shit out. We don't need mommy and daddy government to take care of us. But we've been worked into this position where a lot of people do need mommy and daddy government to take care of them, because all we can do is go to work and come home, and we don't know how to manage our lives. We don't have a sense of autonomy. We don't have a sense of self, really. So we don't trust ourselves. We don't have faith in ourselves or our neighbors or humanity as a whole. Like, we just don't trust that we're smart enough to, and resourceful enough, and that we care enough to figure that shit out on our own. And I think that we do. I think that we do. We've just been missing the tool, you know, and I think that's where Bitcoin is so, I mean, it's a godsend, really, because I think a lot of people have this idea of what they would like humanity to be, how they would like to steward the planet, all of these things, but we've never had the actual tool that is going to allow us to do that. And I think that that's what Bitcoin is. So before, it's like, yeah, how are we going to build the roads? How are we going to fund the police? Like, I don't know. Let's just let the government do it. But it's like, oh, now that we actually have this form of money that puts our life force energy back into ourselves, oh, I realize I am actually powerful enough to initiate change, or
And our
to
communities are powerful enough. And
yes.
I think that this is one of the main misconceptions, is to the like who will build the roads thing, is the politicians aren't going out and doing these things. They're not going out and building the roads.
No.
They're not providing these services. They are just like the admin force that's kind of like throwing money at different actual businesses and contractors to do these things. And there's no way that central force in Washington D.C. or in America. There's different for every country, obviously, but when it's centralized down to that level and it's just more and more power in one single area, they lose touch with what different territories actually need and like how to properly provide those services to them. So I think, and there's certain levels to this. I mean, there's people that are like full blown libertarian, like just blow the government up. It's terrible for everything.
Anarchists.
Yeah. And there's also people, which I would say I'm more in this camp. I lean toward this camp of like, let's just focus on pushing Bitcoin in there, which creates the necessity of responsibility. So you have to spend your money wisely, because when they have the free money printer and it's a bunch of like geriatrics, like 85-year-olds trying to allocate this money to everybody all the time, it's not going to work. It's not going to provide the best services for people. If we removed that layer of wastefulness and brought things to a more decentralized level where there's more like local jurisdictions and local governments that understand, like, and this is something I've been really thinking about as I move. Well, I came back to visit my hometown, as I think I mentioned earlier. I'm in this very small town. It's super beautiful, well run, and the federal government is like the opposite of this, and they wouldn't be able to provide these services the way it does here. And there's so much more culture and vibrance, and the community is really together, and that can happen everywhere. Like, beautiful things will happen when we bring things back to a community level, and that's a theme that keeps coming back, whether it's bringing the family unit back together or bringing the communities back together. Just removing these overarching overlords of that are trying to control everything will have better outcomes if we bring things back to togetherness and humans being able to work together and not be ruled without their permission.
Yeah, it's gonna, like, not only can we build the roads, we'll probably build better ones.
Oh, we for sure
like,
will. Yeah.
We'll do it more efficiently. We'll do it, you know, for less money. And we'll do it in our communities, like you said. And, you know, like, if you live in a community, you probably care about your community.
You have much more skin in the game.
Justin Trudeau's not on the cement roller, you know, driving around BC paving the roads. Like, he's on vacation, probably, that the taxpayers are paying for, even though he could just print the money himself and pay for it himself. And, you know, I feel like we got that narrative a lot during the pandemic as well, that, oh, well, you'll do XYZ to take care of your neighbor. You'll sacrifice yourself in order to care for the community. But what I think a lot of people don't understand is you can't have a strong community unless you have strong individuals. Like, it all starts with the individual first. And again, there's another narrative. Like, we have this idea that taking care of yourself first is selfish, and you're a selfish person, and you should sacrifice for the greater good and blah, blah, blah. But there cannot possibly be a greater good if it's just all of these, vapid shells of human beings that are jacked up on Xanax walking around. Like, you can't not just create a better world, you can't even envision one. Like, you're barely hanging on, right? Like, I'm actually really amazed at how well people are doing given the circumstances. And I actually think most people are doing horribly, but like, holy shit, I don't know. My mental health would be in a completely different place if I was working 3 jobs and paying $1,900 a month for rent and wondering how and when this is ever going to end, and if it's only going to get worse.
The human spirit is amazing. Like, this has really shown that even in extremely difficult times, financially, mentally, spiritually, everything's bearing down on us, but people are still doing a pretty damn good job getting through it, I would say. And I'm sure people will have different opinions on that, of just like, how is the world doing? How are people doing? It's a really tough topic.
Yeah.
But it certainly makes me think, once we break those barriers that are holding people back so hard, that we're going to have a whole new era of massive flourishing and prosperity. Because
I think so too.
a lot of people are just under a ton of weight right now, having a difficult time getting through it. And once that weight is lifted off, we're going to see incredible prosperity. And that is, comes back to fix the money, fix the world. And why Bitcoiners are always... So you can call Bitcoiners crazy all you want for thinking this magic orange coin is going to fix everything. But if you just start talking to them, they're all fucking happy. Yeah. They're optimistic. They're happy. They're stoked on life. They're improving themselves. And they're, ask yourself why. Is that really a bad thing, that people are really optimistic about something that has very tangible ability to fix the core problem? I think that that's something that people should be looking into, even if they think that we're totally nuts for thinking Bitcoin is going to fix everything. That's fine. I'm crazy. I think we can both agree we're a little crazy. At this point in the game, only crazy people are in Bitcoin. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, living in Canada, I mean, that's when I became a Bitcoiner, was during the pandemic, when they announced that these vaccine passports, and you were going to have to show your papers to go into a restaurant or a movie theater. That's when I tapped out. I was like, nope, this is it for me. Like, the mask pushed me to the edge, and like, this is it. I gotta escape this somehow. And it was that very weekend that a guy I was dating asked me if I was a Bitcoiner, because I was over it, man. I was just over it. I was over the whole thing. And there's something in me that, like, I just love the struggle. Like, I love being a Bitcoiner in my community, and everyone is looking at me going, what the fuck? Like, what's going on with her? Like, what is happening here? Like, what is she talking about? What's going on? And, I'm going to El Salvador in November, like I said. And I think maybe a lot of Bitcoiners are like, ooh, I'd love to live in El Salvador, this place where it's a Bitcoin standard, and I'm going to see Bitcoiners all the time, and all we're going to do is talk about Bitcoin. And part of me is like, I kind of want to stay here. Like, I kind of want to stay here and try to orange pill as many people as I can, like, go to dinner parties. And I just went to a dinner party the other night with these 2 people that I only knew from the restaurant, like only interacted with on a very superficial level, but they invited me for dinner at their house. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to see what happens. And, I was there maybe half an hour before he mentioned that his daughter was in school for economics and like global policy. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't not say something. And then we spent the next 4 hours, talking about Bitcoin. And when I got home about 15 minutes later, I got a text that they were online buying Bitcoin. At that moment, I was just like,
Amazing.
fuck yeah. So it's kind of this interesting dance between like, yeah, we want this, this utopia and we want everything. We want a Bitcoin standard. We want everything to be sunny. But I also really kind of love this part, like having this
It's
small
gritty.
community.
Yeah.
Of like-minded individuals. And we're really it's a revolution, like we're all doing what we can do so that this revolution happens. And it's like, I really like this part of it. So, and something
The early
I just
days
started,
are always exciting, for
the
sure.
early days. Yeah. And it's, like I grew up with this sense of like, I had this like revolutionary spirit in me. Every time I would watch like a documentary about Woodstock or the Vietnam War and, all of these moments of like social uprising, something like I have goosebumps now just talking about it. Like something in my soul, in my spirit was like, yes, that is the thing. Like that's why I'm here. And Bitcoin to me is the peaceful revolution. It is this opportunity to completely change the way things are without millions of people needing to die for the cause,
Because
So
fiat money is backed by war and death
yeah,
and destruction and
yeah.
sucking everyone's life energy out in the
Mm-hmm.
population.
Yeah.
All these
It's
things
literally
are
a
required.
battle. Yeah, it's we're literally in the battle between good and evil. Like
Hmm.
it's
There's
you
no other
know,
way to say it, really. I
there's
mean,
really
it's
no
so
other way to
clear.
say it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
People think it's hyperbolic, and anyone that does, just start reading. Go read the Bitcoin
Yeah.
Standard. Start diving into the rabbit hole. There's so many great resources out there to really understand this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
while we're on this topic, why don't you talk about this Bitcoin Coast project? I just saw that pop up on my feed. That sounds cool.
Yeah. So speaking of,
Shill it.
bringing it back to your community and all this kind of stuff. So I'm from Toronto originally, and I moved to Alberta, which is like the Texas of Canada. In my late 20s, I spent 10 years there. So I've been on the coast of British Columbia for 6 years now. Um, and I live in this community. I love it. I've never loved a place as much as I love this place. I even have a tattoo on my arm of the Sunshine Coast. So we're part of the mainland of Canada, but we're only accessible by boat. There's no roads. There's no road from Vancouver that you can take to get to the Sunshine Coast. You have to either fly or get on a boat. And there is, Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador was kind of this first circular economy that people established. There's Bitcoin Lake. There's Bitcoin Island. What else? I'm missing some, but anyway, I'm
Bitcoin
like,
Jungle in Costa
Bitcoin
Rica.
Jungle.
That
Yes,
one's been
thank
speaking
you.
to me. Madeira, free Madeira
Madeira.
project.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
tons of, and they're all in super cool places. I want to go see
yeah,
them all.
yeah. Me too. That's what I'm doing this winter, essentially.
Amazing.
But so like, and we call this place the Sunshine Coast. That's kind of the collective name for these like 7 or 8 communities that stretch up the coast of BC. And I'm like, we could be the Bitcoin Coast. There's an opportunity here to be the Bitcoin Coast, because a lot of the people that live here that own businesses, it's a lot of independent entrepreneur. We don't have big box conglomerate store. Like we have a Tim Hortons and a Starbucks, but that's pretty much the extent of it. So I just feel like there's a real opportunity to introduce Bitcoin to business owners. And luckily I know a lot of these people because I have been in this community for 6 years. I work in a restaurant. I've been a yoga teacher. I kind of know a lot of people from different walks of life, different areas of business. So yeah, I'm launching the Bitcoin Coast. I'm just waiting on some business cards, but I'm going to start onboarding anyone who's interested to accept Bitcoin at their business. Because I think the way that we get Bitcoin into the collective consciousness is just to normalize it, right? Like, I want to walk into a store and see a Bitcoin accepted here sticker. I don't have 4 hours to sit down with every person that lives in this town and explain to them why Bitcoin is a good idea. But I think if we can just normalize people walking into a restaurant and going, oh, they take Bitcoin? Like, Bitcoin's an actual thing. It's not just this idea on the internet that only nerds know about, right? Oh, it's normal. Oh, that must mean it's safe and that it's okay for me to use it. In the same way that we see Amex accepted or Visa, MasterCard, you see those stickers everywhere. I want to see Bitcoin stickers everywhere, because then it's not a big deal. We're not trying to convince you to sell your house and put all of your life savings and go buy Bitcoin. It's like, Bitcoin is just here. It's here, and it's available for you to use if you would like to use it. And I think that's a good way to spread Bitcoin.
And at this point, basically everyone on Earth with an internet connection has heard of it.
Yes.
It's been around for 14 years? And the only disconnect for most of those people is just education and just understanding what's really going on, because they just think it's like an internet gambling token.
Mm-hmm. And one of the first
is
questions
the crypto side of things is basically just turned it into just a massive shit show gambling, and so they all just lump it all together. And that's one of the things I'm really about, is trying to peel Bitcoin away from all that nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And again, I think a great way to do that is, if the average person walks into the grocery store and goes, oh, I can pay in Bitcoin. Well, I can't pay in Ethereum or Cardano or, Elon's new coin. Like, oh, it's Bitcoin. Oh, okay. That must be
the only one that doesn't have a CEO that's just trying to make money. It's like an actual neutral currency, which I love the digital gold analogy, because we talked earlier about how gold worked very well for thousands of years. Inflation didn't exist. It was deflationary for the most part. And people think that inflation is just this default thing, that we need to have the money supply grow and for things to get more expensive all the time.
Yeah.
And deflation is this scary thing. And the people on TV say, like, oh, we don't want deflation. We need to target, 2% inflation or 3% inflation or whatever other number they pull out of their ass.
Healthy.
Yeah. and this is an interesting one. I think a lot of people are stuck on. I'd love to hear your explanation. Is just this idea that we need to have a little bit of money debasement so that people will go spend their money and keep the economy going. It's like it oils the economy and it makes people spend money. But do we really need to add extra incentive for people to spend money, or will they just do that naturally?
No.
I guess the better question I was meaning to ask is deflation bad?
No, deflation is good.
That's simple.
Deflation is good. Deflation means, oh, instead of my Starbucks coffee costing me $10, it's going to cost me $5. So what does that mean? That means I don't have to work as hard to get that Starbucks coffee. What am I going to do with all my spare time? Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll raise my kids, or I'll write a book, or I don't know.
Spend more time in nature, like doing social things, and like having more space in our life to explore our purpose and our calling.
But that being said, in a debt-based economy, which is the economy that we live in, deflation is a bad thing, right? But it's
because it blows it up.
It's because we live in a debt-based economy. Like, even just understanding that. So it's like, hey, if we live in an environment that's based on debt, based on never having enough, never being able to get ahead, how in the hell are we actually supposed to get ahead? Right? It's those like external environmental conditions. I've been saying this for a while too. Like, maybe it's not you're not bad with money. It's your money that's bad.
Exactly.
Right?
That's an
And,
important message.
and, again, I include myself in this statement. Like, I would say 99.9, if not 100% of people have a dysfunctional relationship with money. Whether you are in the top 1%, guess what? Your relationship's dysfunctional for sure. And if you're in the bottom 99%, you probably also have a dysfunctional relationship with money. And I think that's where that, like, maybe that emotional aspect comes into it. So when we bring up Bitcoin, when we start talking about money, people just go, they can't, it's like talking about death. Like, you just go, here's this thing I don't understand, that I have constant anxiety about, that my husband and I fight about every day. So why the hell would an everyday person want to talk about money? Nobody wants to talk about money because it's this big, bad, ugly, scary thing. And if you grew up impoverished, if you grew up on food stamps, you really don't want to talk about it at that point, because that's like, I don't know. So I find a lot of compassion for people from that aspect. Like, we are in a toxic relationship with our government, who is in control of our money. And and because of that, they're literally in control of our life, our time, our energy.
It's a source of stress basically by default these days,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
pretty much everyone is struggling in some sense, and those that aren't are, I mean, they've just learned how to cheat and play the
Yeah.
cheating game well.
Yeah.
How to work their way up the chain and, get a little bit of that money spigot that's creating the free money and diluting everyone else. So
Mhm.
in order to
Mhm.
succeed right now, you have to fuck over everyone else and not be shameful about it. And
Yeah.
that's why we see all these psychopaths like naturally just floating to the top and being in control of everything, because you have to be a psychopath to not care about screwing a bunch of people to get more power.
Mhm.
So it just naturally brings those people up into those positions that make those calls. So
Yeah.
that's just like a great point. Like, people just think money is evil. They just think
Yes.
that the entire idea of money is evil. But
And
how would
capitalism.
you respond to those?
Don't
Yeah,
forget
we could
about
talk.
evil capitalism.
Yeah, I love to talk about both of those. So first of
Yeah.
all, is money evil? And then we can talk about, is capitalism evil?
Yeah, money is definitely not evil. The people in charge of the money, again, I vacillate between, are they evil or are they stupid? It might be a combination of both. I don't know, but
It's a metronome
money,
of the two.
yeah. Money, again, is simply just a representation of your time. That's it. So unless you murder people for money, then I would say money is not evil. Money is, again, it's just a tool. It is what it is. Is capitalism evil? No. Capitalism is not evil. um, I used to think capitalism was evil. I used to be that person on Instagram,
We all start there, I
three,
think. I
four,
definitely
5 years
did.
ago. Yep, I would say, like, oh, it's capitalism that's the problem. But nobody actually understands what capitalism is. And I'm no expert. Um, but it's kind of like the feminism thing. Like, the idea of what this thing is has been co-opted and corrupted because of the money and the people in charge of the money printer. The government has been given the green light, to blame it on capitalism, so that they're not the ones getting blamed for the problem.
There's always
Yeah.
a scapegoat.
Yeah.
And
We're being
this,
gaslit
yeah, yeah, this is like the most
24/7.
gaslit generation and just time to be alive ever. Is
Yeah.
and these people have full control of the media too to really push these messages. Because I was in the same boat. I thought, like, oh, capitalism is bad because that's the thing that causes infinite growth of everything, just needing more and more and more. It sucks up all the resources, it destroys the planet, and people go crazy, because it kind of makes sense when you think about it in a very simplified way.
Mm-hmm.
But then you start realizing, and this is another point that Robert Breedlove talks about, is this country is much, well, America and Canada have different governments, but from an American point of view, this country is much more socialist than capitalist, because there's a
Whoa.
money printer. Whenever a centralized force has complete control over the money and therefore everything else, there is no free market anymore.
Mm-mm.
All the regulations they make up, all the rules, they pick the winners. That's not
Yeah.
capitalism at all. So the
Yeah.
fact that people think this is capitalism in the first place is wrong. That's just like
Exactly.
incorrect footing. The libertarian versus Democrat versus Republican, capitalism, communism, Austrian economics, that stuff is, that's all just this big mess for people that aren't in this world. But it all is a very interesting puzzle, and
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly gone down a rabbit hole of reading all these books, and I've just come to the realization that capitalism is a good thing. And we don't have it now. If we did achieve real capitalism, and Bitcoin will help that, because it
Mm-hmm.
creates an actual free market where the winners should win, and they don't get pushed out by people that just have more bribes going up to the politicians.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the mess of bad incentives will naturally fix itself organically.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why having Bitcoin to rally around and focus on is such a powerful thing, and why people get so religious culty about it. Because
Mm-hmm.
it really is the perfect tool for this job of
Yeah.
creating an incentive structure that rewards being responsible, or I guess just forces responsibility is a better way to put it. It makes it so people are actually forced to make good actions for others and themselves without
Mm-hmm.
cheating. And
Yeah.
the system right now rewards cheaters everywhere. Like, the more you cheat, the more you win. And until we flip that on its head, we're going to continue having a very confusing, screwed up world, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Have you read Saifedean's Principles of Economics?
So funny you
His
mentioned that.
latest?
I was at his carnivore dinner in Miami at the Bitcoin
Cool.
conference. I bought a copy of the book there, and 1 week later I was in Mexico and I realized I didn't have it in my bag, so I just left it somewhere on accident.
Oh no.
So
Oh
I
well.
was talking about this with my buddy I went there with. We both bought a copy, and it must be sitting somewhere around Miami, and I hope someone finds it and just finds their
Puts it to
way
good
down the
use.
path.
Yeah.
And someday I will meet someone that says, I I learned about Bitcoin by finding this book on the ground, and I started reading it. It was very interesting. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm going to take that as a gift to the world. And of course, I'm more than happy to be paying Safety for his work, even if I don't get the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's no Bitcoin standard. I will say that. I mean, it's I didn't find it as like deeply enthralling and engaging, but it did explain a lot of things about the economy and capitalism to me that we get a completely distorted definition of through our society that we live in. Um, I always thought economics was like math and science,
Hmm.
right? But through the Austrian lens, economics is just human action.
Yes.
What's important to you, and what do you acquire, and what is that decision making process that goes into you deciding I'm going to choose this thing over that thing, and
Hmm.
having that set the prices for things like you said in a free market, right? And right now, yeah, fiat money is it completely distorts is a generous word. Like it completely distorts human behavior and what matters to us, right? So yeah, this idea that, capitalism is the thing that's destroying the planet. All capitalism is private individuals deciding what the value of something is. And you want that. You don't want
Capitalism is nature.
governments.
Like, if
Yeah.
nature is capitalism, where everyone is acting in their own best interest, trying to
Yeah.
create the most value for the world and being rewarded for that in money,
Yeah.
and allowing everyone to compete together in an open way and not have to fight any central overlord entity trying to like say, no, you can't do this, you can't do this. And so it's like the natural way of the world. That is like the default, is
Mhm.
capitalism. Like,
Yeah.
the real world, and like if you walk out into the woods and see animals going around foraging for food and competing for a mate, like the nature is capitalism. And
Mhm.
every other one is some different thing where people are trying to rule each other. And spoiler alert, it never works. It becomes just a power tripping shit show.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting. I don't know. I'm curious about what you think's going to be coming down the pike for the next few years, but I have a feeling it's going to be this climate hysteria and, blaming capitalism, blaming corporations for global warming and all, and watching, what humans are going to be willing to sacrifice in order to defeat capitalism and change the weather. Like how many people are actually going to go for that and how many people are going to say, wait a sec, like what do you think the next thing is? Like what's going on?
I don't know, but I'm gonna just be eating my steak, watching it all go down, and talking to interesting people about it to see what's.
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's tough to say, and that's part of the reason why I started podcasts, because like things are moving so fast and there's just so many interesting ideas that aren't being heard by the normal pipelines of the
Mhm.
people who are orchestrating everything. And I just think that's the more ideas we can get out there, the more opening of the brain to different types of thoughts, the more we can get those brain juices flowing and figure out what's really going on. And
Mhm.
I'm no expert, you're no expert, but we have interesting ideas. And anyone listening to this that isn't in the Bitcoin world will hopefully have some things to walk away with, which is always the goal. And man, with that said, we've been going almost 2 hours here. I guess we can
Yeah.
start putting a bow on it. Do you have any final words to the universe that you want to
Yes.
share?
Yes, I do. I would say, even if you don't understand Bitcoin, if you don't understand money, if you don't even see things from the perspective that I see them or that Ben sees them, I do believe that the majority of people have a sense on some level that something is wrong. Something's wrong. Full stop. Like, it doesn't matter necessarily why it's wrong, who's to blame, you know, but something is wrong. And what I've said to friends and family, I consider myself to be an intelligent person. I've spent, thousands of hours studying money, monetary history, the economy, Bitcoin, etc. And I really think at this point in time, to have no Bitcoin is a much worse idea than having $50 worth of Bitcoin. Like, really, at this point, why wouldn't you just go ahead and get $20 worth, $10 worth, right? Why wouldn't you do that? Like, even if it does go to zero, which people who believe in it don't think is going to happen, but even if it does go to zero and you lose your $20, oh well, I guess you get to tell me I told you so, right? But just in the off chance that that doesn't happen and the dollar does hyperinflate and all of a sudden is worth nothing, and you need a medium of exchange in order to get groceries for your family, you might want to have a different form of money on hand to be able to do that. I think a lot of people like to think that if they were put into a survival situation that they would just be able to figure it out. Well, most people don't know how to shoot a bow and arrow. They can't go into the woods and kill a deer and butcher it and build a fire. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a lot of people that we need money. We need money. And this goes back to your money is evil point. Money is not evil. We need it. We need it to function.
It's a tool for people to specialize in what they're good at and
yes,
trade with each other in a mutually beneficial way.
Yeah.
If I'm better at, raising cattle, you're better at growing fruit. We're both able to do what we're best at and have something to trade with each other. That,
yes,
it gets really messy when you're bartering between these actual objects and goods and services. Having something everyone can agree on as a baseline, that's what money does, and it increases abundance for everybody.
Exactly.
It's a good
Safety
thing, undoubtedly.
Safety talks about that in his book, so you probably don't even need to read it. But, just have a little bit, just in case. And then the effects of, and it might just change the world at the same time. And why wouldn't you want to participate in that? Right? Like, it's about the money, and it's also not about the money at all. Like, I'm not in this to get rich quick. I'm in this because I believe that this is going to change the world. And a really cool side effect of that is that I might get rich, because of that. But it is so much more than just, it's about so much more than just the money. But it can just be about the money for you right now too, and that's okay.
Get off zero, get skin in the game, read the Bitcoin Standard, and start turning into a crazy person with us.
Yeah.
It's fun over here.
It's really great. It's the best.
Erin Crawford, you are amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today. You are just a wonderful person, and you're sharing great messages with the world. I can't wait to do this with you again and meet you someday, because we've been in touch on social media for the longest time. Crazy world, crazy times. So happy to make connections with folks like you who are in the thick of it, living life, and putting good messages out there. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, well, right back at ya. I feel the same way. I was so stoked. You're like, let's do this tomorrow. I was like, all right, let's go.
No prep needed. We know what we're about.
Needed. Yeah. It's like, I really don't need to get anything ready to just sit down and riff on Bitcoin and society. So yeah, I'm super happy you're doing a podcast. Like, we need more of them, every person that we can reach.
The more the better. No more scarcity mindset. People thinking, oh, there's too many people, doing podcasts. Too many people are already blogging. Too many people are already doing this. Fuck that. Just do it.
Yeah. There's a lot of people on the planet.
Like, just open up just creating a platform for yourself where you can learn yourself and like others can learn with you. How can you think that there's too many of that? Like, that's the best thing ever for even as an individual to learn yourself, and it increases your own awareness of the world and new ideas coming in. It's just all good. And
yeah,
I love that there's more and more people doing podcasts. I say the more the better.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much for your time, Erin. We'll be in touch.
Yeah,
have a good one.
I can't wait to listen to your podcast and follow along and talk to you again at some point.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.